Hi everybody, this is Kathy Driscoll with the Nature Foundation at Wintergreen, and we're going to review Earth and its oceans today. So, while I'm holding this globe to show you what the Earth actually looks like, you may notice that a good chunk of this globe is the color blue. Well, that blue represents our oceans. Can you guess what percentage of our Earth is made up of oceans? Did I hear somewhere in the ballpark of 71%? If you said 71%, you were exactly right. So 3/4 of our Earth is made up of ocean water, which we are going to talk about. So today, we're going to go over our major geological features, the ocean's physical properties, and the ocean's living organisms. So let's see what you guys know about these three major topics. Well, let's talk first about the ocean floor and how the geographical topography looks. In fact, if you look at the ocean floor, it's kind of like our floor under our feet, or I should say the Earth, the terrestrial part under our feet. The ocean floor is made up of several different unique geographical features, such as volcanoes, mountains, ridges, and you may even see a few other things as in slopes and shelves and valleys. And another feature is called a plateau. So let's go over each unique region and what that significance is for wildlife. So if we talk about the continental shelf here, that is actually a part of the ocean that is pretty much all over the world. Sorry, I can't hold the globe and talk to you at the same time. But if you look at all of the coastal lines of these continents, they have a continental shelf. That's basically where the water meets the land. That makes up about 7% of the ocean floor. And that also is the most significant area because it allows the most sunlight in. Therefore, the temperature is going to be different, and we'll talk about that in a second. So, our ocean starts with a continental shelf that allows the sunlight on this very small section of the ocean. The next region then would be the slope, where it all of a sudden drops off a bit, that continental slope. And the continental slope actually makes up about 28% of our ocean floor. So that's like the next step, if you will. All right, and with that 28%, less sunlight gets to this section of the ocean. All righty, the other very important section from the shelf moving on down deep into the water would be called the continental rise. And the continental rise is a very significant place where there's very little sunlight at this continental rise. And that actually makes up 50% of the ocean. So let's talk about all three of those. You'll notice here that I did include a mid-ocean ridge, which you guys should know already, and the Rift Valley. This is a great place where certain nuclear hot things can happen, like volcanic activities, maybe even earthquakes. It's a very unstable part of the ocean. Okay, looking at how energy moves across the Earth from one continent to another. As you see here, energy is moving in waves. So our ocean is a constant movement, constantly going and flowing. So let's talk about the three major physical characteristics of the ocean. We're going to go over the depth of an ocean, and the temperature of an ocean, and the salinity. And not one of those are what we consider stagnant. They never stay the same. So when we talk about the ocean's depth, we simply mean the different deep parts of the ocean. How deep of the ocean floor? 20,000 leagues under the sea. And the further away that you're going to the ocean floor and away from the top of the surface of the water would directly affect the temperature. So temperature is related to how deep I were to stick this into water, how deep it would go into cold water, because there's no sun to warm it up, and what the temperature would be like. The salinity, that's all about how much salt there is in the ocean. Where does the salt come from? Well, a lot of these ocean critters actually are made up of things like calcium, magnesium, and sodium. And when ocean animals die, marine life die, those bones that are left over eventually wear down and bring salt into our oceans. That's just one way of looking at salinity. But salt that is in our ocean water makes it a very unique environment for the wildlife to survive. So I said, here's sodium salt, or sodium chloride. If we remember this in matter, it's a chemical compound. This is actually magnesium sulfate, and that's a good chunk of what ocean water is made of. And then of course I said calcium. So our oceans are saturated with salt, and in some places they can be super saturated, meaning that there's more salt in the water that the water can't hold anymore. It makes it very dense. And only certain animals can live in this type of environment. So let's talk about the communities with these animals and this marine life. As you see here, this is just a conch. Actually, conchs are found in Bermuda, Jamaica, Bahama. Ooh, I wanna go there right now. It's cold here. Let's talk about some warm water. So, conchs and whelks, animals that actually, I call them strange, don't look anything like a dog or a cat, but there's an animal that lives inside of it, and that animal is much like a snail. Although I have been told conchs are highly intelligent. As you see here, that it is half sticking out of the water. So what major geographical location do you think these guys would survive? Well, let me tell you one thing. They are designed, as you see here with this whelk, as spiked and somewhat rounded, that if a wave were to push this whelk over, he would roll over, but he would have the ability to right himself. And in fact, if he was on his back, if you will, in the ocean, he would drown. So he could literally pull himself back over so that he could do what he does best. Crawl along the surface of the what part of the ocean floor? I hope you guys said continental shelf. Remember, that only makes 7% of the ocean floor. And that's where most of the sunlight can come through. And it's extremely important for life to be teeming in the ocean of this region, the 7% region with that sunlight, because what mostly can grow here and have good sandy bottom, and that is right in here, is our coral. Okay? So coral reefs are animals, and they are minerals, and they're vegetables. They make up all three. When they die, their body becomes a mineral. like this sand dollar here. Ooh, I hope this focuses in for ya. So the sand dollar, no longer alive, it's very sharp and fragile. So coral is the same way. Once an animal, the body then becomes hardened and it's very sharp. As you see here, it comes in many colors, so that gives it the vegetable component. I said animal, mineral, vegetable. Well, technically it's not a vegetable. It's actually bacteria. So different bacterias give the coral its beautiful colors. And the only way that can happen is if it can live in clear, warm, and sandy bottomed water. So most of our coral are going to be found below Gray's Reef in South Carolina, but most of it is going to be near the equator, okay? So with that, coral reefs become an ecosystem themselves because other animals creep in. As you see here, this is actually a clam. I like to say it's a giant clam. Clams rely on the continental shelf to bury themselves right into the ground. They close up, alrighty, just like that, especially when a predator comes by and the animal is inside of this. This is the outer body. It's all hard, well, they call it chitin, and the inside is sucra, which makes it, that gives it that nice shiny sheer, but the animal is inside and it's more like the texture of your tongue. So if you touch your tongue, pretend you're touching a clam, okay? So it has a foot and it can crawl around a little bit with that foot, but mainly it is a sedentary animal at the continental shelf. And when it's hungry, it eats things like plankton, and it'll open up and allow the waves to flow through so he can munch on some small animals himself. That's our clam. Other animals that rely on this very unique and fragile environment include the sea star. Sea stars walk along the floor and they look for their food that way. So all of the animal parts that you would think of, like well, actually technically the eyes are right here, but their feet are along here and they are what we call symmetrical, meaning that it's got 5 parts, 5 equal parts, and that with those little teeny tiny feet it can crawl along, and technically it doesn't have a mouth like you and I think of a mouth. It has like a removable stomach where it just literally stomachs its food and swallows it and eats it. So sea stars are very unusual creatures of this particular region. As well as, what is this? Does anybody know? Can anybody take a great big guess? Yes, that's right. How did you know that? It's a sea urchin. Excellent. So sea urchins, sand dollars, which also is symmetrical with 5 parts, and sea stars. We don't call them sea fish because fish is fish, and this is not a fish. Sea stars, sand dollars, and sea urchins all belong in a group called the echinoderms. All right, so these guys are totally dependent upon that very first region of the ocean. Marine life at the continental slope, where it dips off, and we said, oh wow, that's 28% of the ocean floor, and that would include very strange looking critters, although I love to eat this, shrimp and squid and octopi. So we've got some unusual critters swimming here in darker regions where there's not so much light. Okay? They don't need to see. They just need to float along. They just go with the flow. Alrighty. And then last but not least, marine life at the continental rise. What's this one called, guys? I can hear you say it. Did I hear anglerfish? Whoop, whoop. That's right. Anglerfish is a fish that we may have seen in Finding Nemo when they went down to the abyss where it was darker than dirt. Darker than the darkest night. strange creatures come out of there. And they usually don't have much color. Why should they? Nobody can see them. But this particular one has this really groovy light, and that's how he captures his predators. I mean, wait a minute, he is the predator. Look at those teeth. He is that predator. He captures his food that way, his prey, and they follow the light and chomp. So our most unusual creatures that can withstand really deep waters and cold waters and the darkness, not to mention the further down you go into the ocean, the more pressure there is. So imagine you jumping in and all this water's pushing on your head and pressurizing you all the way down. So it takes a very unusual creature to live in the abyss. All right. Last but not least, we've got to talk about the open waters, because there are lots and lots of unusual and not so unusual marine life. So I'm sure you guys have seen and heard about sea turtles. They have some things in common to our regular aquatic freshwater. Here, I'm going to do a little sea turtle shadow. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And these guys have fins just like our turtles do, although their fins are more elongated and they are serving more of time in the water, because really they don't get out as much of the water as our freshwater turtle do. So they're swimming most of their lives, hanging out in the sponges and in the weeds and looking for their favorite types of foods, which would be things like sponges and weeds. So these guys are pretty normal, and sometimes you can see them pop up and take a deep breath, because you know what? They can hold their breath. That's right. They don't have a way like gills to breathe underwater. They just go and back down they go into the open waters to swim. And then there is, well, I'm going to say my favorite is for last because I love sharks. But I want to talk about this really cool dude. He can hang out anywhere pretty much. And that is a skate. And skates and sharks are actually cousins. Skates kind of fly through the open waters, and they can land in the sand, if you will. I won't pour sand on this guy because then I have to clean it up. So there he is. He's in the sand. He kicks some sand over him, and he waits ever so carefully with those eyes sticking out of the sand until dun 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 dun, an unsuspecting sea urchin comes by, and so our skates have very unusual mouth parts that can open up the sea urchin and eat this animal. So skates are, when I said related to our sharks, that means that their bones are cartilage. They have more cartilage than hard bones like of our other fish. And these guys are famous, just like the sharks, for breaching out of the water. And that means, hey, I'm gonna jump and back down. These guys can swim fairly fast. So last but not least of our open waters is the apex predator, and that's right, nothing eats a shark. Nobody gets me. Ah! Dun 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. What makes a shark the most amazing predator on Earth is that, one, he's got that cartilaginous body. That means when he breaches, this guy can be swimming at 35, 50 miles an hour, if you're a great white shark, and jump out of the water. Say he misses his seal. He just missed that seal. He'll jump and he can flip his whole body back around in the air, back into the water, and eat that seal. That's number one characteristic. Adaptation number one. Adaptation number two, he's got these senses here that he can smell with. Yes, he's got a nose-like smelly structure, so he can smell things like blood. And if there's food around, he has another way to find his food if it's murky and dark. And then, last but not least, I love to talk about their teeth, because their teeth are the most amazing thing. not only do sharks have very sharp teeth, this is a shark mouth. This would be the dorsal where he's got his spine, and he's smiling. Okay, his teeth actually are even sharp even when it's dead. But on the back side, you may notice there's more teeth just folded over. So if he loses a tooth, another tooth comes popping out. So he can keep on eating till the day he dies. That is the apex predator. So sharks and our fish, oh God, so many fish, flying fish, marlins, swordfish, our turtles, lots of animals that live in the open waters. So I'm going to say this is the end, but don't forget to review those three major regions, the continental shelf, slope, and rise. Don't forget your salinity, your temperature changes, and the depth of your studying. And of course, never ever forget how significant this marine life is for our Earth, because no other planet has it. Thanks, guys. Brought to you by Kathy at the Nature Foundation of Wintergreen.